Today we will be looking at research into how the carotid body senses low blood sugar and how diseases, like diabetes, change carotid body function to cause cardiovascular disease in these patients. But what actually is the carotid body, and what does it do? The carotid body is a group of sensory and supporting cells that detect chemical stimuli in the blood, for example, low pH, high carbon dioxide, and low oxygen. A carotid body is found where a carotid sinus splits in two. In fact, there are two carotid bodies, one either side of the throat. Now on to diabetes. What do we already know? Well, we know there are two types. Type 1 diabetes is when the pancreas doesn't produce enough insulin, leading to uncontrolled high blood glucose levels in the body, which can be treated with insulin injections. Type 2 diabetes is when the cells of the body don't respond to insulin. It is treated with a carbohydrate-controlled diet and exercise regime, but in severe cases, type 2 diabetics also require insulin injections. These insulin injections can then lead to low blood sugar. In fact, type 1 diabetics have the highest recurrence of symptomless low blood sugar. They actually spend about 10% of their time with a plasma glucose concentration of 2.8 to 3.3 millimolar. And they have about 2 episodes of low blood sugar a week, which would mean thousands in their lifetime. Type 1 diabetics will also have one severe episode of low blood sugar a year. So how is this low blood sugar sensed by the carotid body? Well, there are currently 3 possible mechanisms. Firstly, insulin itself could stimulate insulin receptors of the carotid body. Or it could be the carotid body directly sensing the low glucose. Or finally, the low glucose is sensed by cells at the bottom of the brain, which triggers a series of events that eventually activate the carotid body. Current research leans towards this third mechanism, so let's look at this pathway in more detail. As we said before, low blood sugar is sensed by cells at the bottom of the brain, leading to an increased nerve activity down the spinal cord to the adrenal glands. This triggers adrenaline production, which travels to 3 different places in the body via the blood. At the liver, adrenaline causes production of glucose, which restores the plasma glucose concentration. Adrenaline also acts on beta receptors of the carotid body, which increases its CO2 sensitivity and increases the depth and rate of breathing. Finally, adrenaline increases whole body metabolism, which would increase blood CO2 and lower its pH. This would make your blood more acidic and cause proteins such as enzymes to denature. However, it is blocked by the carotid body increasing ventilation, thereby reducing CO2 and increasing pH back to normal. As we said before, too much insulin leads to low blood sugar. Episodes of low blood sugar over a long period of time are thought to lead to changes in the carotid body, which can result in heart failure, kidney failure, coma, irregular heart rate, or high blood pressure. Inflammatory molecules produced in type 2 diabetes could be another way that the disease affects the carotid body. The molecules themselves would increase the activity of the carotid body, leading to high blood pressure and irregularities in heart rate. But what does all this mean in terms of adrenaline signalling and blood sugar regulation? The low blood sugar is still detected by receptors in the brain to increase nerve activity down the spinal cord to the adrenal glands. But as this low blood sugar is recurrent, it leads to episodes of adrenaline release, which may cause negative changes in the carotid bodies of patients with type 1 diabetes and predispose them to cardiovascular disease. In severe type 2 diabetes, low blood sugar goes through this same pathway, but the disease also increases the amount of inflammatory molecules, which then overactivate the carotid body. This further increases adrenaline release from the adrenal glands, causes irregular breathing, high blood pressure, and an irregular heartbeat. These last two consequences can lead to cardiovascular disease. So what can be done next? More research into the mechanism behind sensing low blood sugar needs to be done. Does the carotid body sense the fall in blood glucose directly, sense the fall in insulin, or sense the increase in circulating adrenaline? We also want to know how episodes of low blood sugar can exaggerate negative changes in the carotid bodies of diabetic patients. Could it be via the action of adrenaline? Research also needs to be done into ways of targeting the carotid body in obesity and early type 2 diabetes to combat the effects of inflammation. Finally, there is the possibility of the use of beta blockers to prevent the action of adrenaline on the carotid body. If you remember, adrenaline acts on the beta receptors of the carotid body. There are actually 3 types of beta receptors, so we first need to find out which type are on the carotid body. Once we know which of the 3 beta receptors are on the carotid body, we can use a blocker specific to that type to reduce the effects of adrenaline. Depending on which beta receptors are being targeted, these blockers could either cause the loss of the receptors from cell membranes of the heart, which also occurs in heart failure, or inhibit the dilation of airways. So could treatment with beta blockers cause problems? Let's summarise everything we've covered today. First, we looked into the 2 types of diabetes. This led on to how too much insulin, possibly due to the diabetic overcalculating the amount they needed after a meal, leads to episodes of low blood sugar. We then moved on to how these episodes could cause changes in or the overactivation of the carotid body to cause cardiovascular disease. Finally, we discussed what research needed to be done, such as blocking the action of adrenaline and inflammatory molecules as preventative treatment.